Let me ask you something. When you think about intimacy, what comes to mind? Connection, pleasure, fun, exploration. Now, what if I told you that where I grew up, the word fun and the word intimacy were never ever used in the same sentence? In fact, they were almost opposites. I'm Sarah, and I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I left the community when I was 21, and one of the biggest shocks wasn't the electricity or the internet or even the clothes. It was realizing that the rest of the world had a completely different understanding of what happens between a husband and wife. So today we're talking about something nobody wants to discuss, but everyone's curious about. Do the Amish believe intimacy should be fun? And buckle up, because this answer is way more complicated than you think. First, let me be clear. I'm going to talk about this honestly, but respectfully. These are real people, real beliefs, and this was my life for 2 decades. I'm not here to mock anyone or sensationalize anything. I'm here to tell you the truth as I lived it. The short answer is no. The Amish do not believe intimacy should be fun. But before you judge that too harshly, you need to understand the why. Because it's not about being miserable or repressed, at least not intentionally. It's about purpose. In the Amish community, intimacy between a husband and wife has exactly one primary purpose: children. That's it. It's a duty, a responsibility, a sacred act for procreation. Anything beyond that gets into murky territory. I remember being about 14, and a group of us girls were helping at a quilting bee. One of the older women, she was probably in her 50s, was talking to a young bride who'd just gotten married a few months earlier. The bride looked exhausted, and someone asked if she was feeling okay. She said she was just tired from all the new responsibilities of running a household. And this older woman, she leaned in and said, "Remember, it's your duty to your husband and to God. It's not about what you want, it's about obedience and blessing your marriage with children." At 14, I didn't fully understand what she meant. By 17, when the marriage conversations started happening around me, I understood completely. Intimacy wasn't something you were supposed to enjoy, it was something you endured, submitted to, and if you were blessed, it resulted in a baby. Now, here's where it gets complicated. The Amish don't talk about this stuff openly. There's no sex education, there's no books, no diagrams, no honest conversations. You go into marriage knowing almost nothing. My mom told me exactly two things the week before my wedding was supposed to happen. One, it's going to hurt the first time. Two, you do what your husband needs and you don't complain. That was it. That was my entire education. The bishop's wife told a group of us girls one time that a godly woman doesn't seek pleasure in the marriage bed because that's vanity. That's focusing on yourself instead of your role as a wife and future mother. She said pleasure might happen, but it shouldn't be the goal. The goal is children and fulfilling your marital obligation. I remember one girl asked, "But what if it never feels good?" And the bishop's wife just said, "Then you're blessed with humility." I didn't leave before my wedding because of this, but it was part of it. I started having these questions I wasn't allowed to ask. Why would God design our bodies with the capacity for pleasure and then tell us it's wrong to experience it? Why was every book, every sermon, every conversation about intimacy framed around duty and never around connection or joy? Why did the men get to talk about their needs being met, but women were just supposed to silently comply? When I left and started learning about intimacy outside the community, I felt like I'd been lied to my entire life. Not maliciously, but lied to nonetheless. I learned that intimacy could be about connection, about mutual pleasure, about exploring and learning together. I learned that women were allowed to want it, to enjoy it, to say yes because they wanted to, not because it was their obligation. But here's the thing I need you to understand. The Amish approach isn't just about controlling women, even though it does do that. It's about controlling desire in general. Men are also taught that lust is sinful, that thinking too much about intimacy outside of procreation is worldly and dangerous. They're taught to be quick and dutiful, not passionate or creative. The whole thing is designed to keep intimacy in this very small, very controlled box labeled for reproduction only. I talked to my cousin a few years after I left. She'd gotten married in the community, and we met in secret because she wasn't supposed to be associating with me. I asked her, as delicately as I could, if things were okay in her marriage. She knew what I meant. She said, "It's fine. It's what it is. He's not rough, and we have two beautiful children." I asked if she enjoyed it, and she looked at me like I'd asked if she enjoyed mucking out the barn. She said, "Sarah, that's not the point. It's not about enjoying. It's about doing what's right." And that's when it really hit me. She wasn't miserable. She wasn't traumatized. She'd just been so conditioned to believe that her own pleasure was irrelevant that she'd never even considered it as a possibility. It wasn't something she was being denied. It was something she'd never been told she was allowed to have. There are Amish couples who figure it out. I know there are. You can't have communities with families of 8, 10, 12 children and tell me that every single act of intimacy is joyless duty. Human biology doesn't work that way, but even if they experience pleasure, even if they enjoy each other, they don't talk about it, they don't acknowledge it. Because to acknowledge it would be to admit that there's more to intimacy than procreation, and that opens a door the community wants to keep sealed shut. Why? Because pleasure can be distracting. Pleasure can make you think about your own desires, your own body, your own autonomy. And a community that relies on obedience, on conformity, on putting the group above the individual cannot afford for people to start prioritizing their own pleasure. It's not about intimacy specifically, it's about control. The Amish also believe that anything resembling vanity is sinful, and that extends into the bedroom. I knew a woman who left the community years before I did, and she told me she'd been reprimanded by a church leader because her husband mentioned that she seemed to be enjoying intimacy too much. Not that she was doing anything wrong, just that she seemed too enthusiastic. The leader told her that kind of behavior was immodest and could lead her husband into lustful thinking. She was supposed to be passive, receptive, but not participatory. I remember thinking, how is that even possible? How do you exist in that moment but not exist at the same time? When I first started dating in the outside world, I had no idea what I was doing. I'd been taught that my body was shameful, that desire was sinful, that intimacy was a transaction where I provided a service and received nothing in return except hopefully a baby. Learning that it could be different, that it should be different, was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I had to unlearn the idea that my pleasure didn't matter. I had to unlearn the shame. I had to unlearn the belief that wanting intimacy made me sinful or vain or immodest. And honestly, I'm still unlearning it. That kind of conditioning doesn't go away overnight. So, do the Amish believe intimacy should be fun? No, they believe it should be purposeful, dutiful, and controlled. Fun implies frivolity, self-indulgence, worldliness, and those are things the Amish actively avoid. But does that mean every Amish person has a miserable, joyless, intimate life? Not necessarily. It means they've been taught not to expect anything beyond procreation, and for many, that's enough because it's all they've ever known. What breaks my heart is the women who leave and realize what they missed. The women who spent 20 years in a marriage where their own bodies were a mystery to them, where pleasure was never even on the table. I know women who left in their 40s and 50s and had to relearn everything, had to learn that they were allowed to say no, allowed to say yes because they wanted to, not because it was expected, allowed to explore and ask for what they needed. And I know this is uncomfortable to hear. I know some of you are squirming right now, but this is the reality. This is what purity culture and extreme religious control does. It takes something that should be beautiful and mutual and turns it into an obligation. It teaches half the population that their bodies exist for someone else's use and God's purpose, and their own experience is irrelevant. If you're from a similar background, whether Amish or another strict religious community, and you're trying to unpack this stuff, I see you. It's hard, it's confusing, and it's okay to be angry about what you were taught. It's okay to grieve what you didn't get to experience. And it's okay to take your time figuring out what intimacy means to you now. The Amish aren't evil. They're not monsters. They're people living according to a belief system that prioritizes community and obedience over individual desire. But that doesn't mean the cost isn't real, and it doesn't mean we can't acknowledge that cost, especially for the women who bear the brunt of it. Thanks for listening. I know this was heavy, but it needed to be said. If this brought up stuff for you, find someone safe to talk to. And if you're still in a situation where your own pleasure and autonomy don't matter, I hope one day you find your way out.